I want to begin this story the same way that day began for me. Quietly, simply, without any sign that something life-changing was about to happen. There are moments in life that arrive like storms, loud and violent, tearing through everything without warning. But there are other moments, far more dangerous, that appear in the softest way possible. They approach slowly, almost kindly, like a gentle knock at the door. They sound harmless, almost peaceful. You never think they will hurt you, not until the moment they do. And by then, the damage is already done. I wish I could say that what happened to me came with flashes of anger or raised voices or the dramatic tension of an argument. But it didn't. It came in silence. It came in calm words. It came in the steady voice of the man my daughter chose to marry. And maybe that is what made his words hurt the most. They were not spoken with hatred or fire. They were spoken with certainty, as if he had already rehearsed them, already accepted them, already believed in them. The words were simple. The greatest gift I could give to their wedding was to disappear from their family. For a long time, I didn't even react. I think my mind tried to protect me by slowing everything down. When he spoke, I felt like I had stepped out of myself, like I was watching the moment from a distance. I remember seeing his mouth move, his calm expression, the gentle way he rested his hands on his knees. And beside him was my daughter, the person I loved more than anyone else in the world. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together in a way she used to do when she was nervous as a child. Except back then she would look at me for comfort, for reassurance. This time she didn't look at me at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to go back a little, because nothing this painful arrives without a long road leading up to it. Maybe if I had paid attention earlier, if I had seen the signs, I might have understood what was coming. But I didn't. I walked into it with a full heart, believing I still had a place in my daughter's life. Believing I would always be her father the same way I had always been. Believing that no matter how much life changed, the love between us would not. I was wrong, and I didn't know it yet. The morning she called me was quiet. I woke up early, around 6, the way I always do. It's a habit I never broke even after retiring. My house sits in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind where you hear birds in the morning and the soft hum of distant traffic. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the same small wooden table I've had for years. The sun was coming in slowly through the curtains, making the dust in the air look like tiny floating stars. I was tired but content in the simple way a person becomes content when they accept that their life is quieter now. Then my phone rang. When I saw her name on the screen, I smiled. I always smiled when she called. No matter how much life had changed between us, that part never changed. She used to call me about everything when she was younger. Her homework, her friends, her doubts, her fears, the boys she liked but didn't want to admit she liked. Then later, her college decisions, her job, her plans, her frustrations. Even when life became busy, she still called me every week. Sometimes only for a few minutes, sometimes longer, but she always called. But that morning, something was different. Her voice was calm, too calm. There was a careful tone behind it, the kind you use when you're trying not to disturb the air around you. She asked if she and Mark could come over to talk. She didn't say why. She didn't explain anything. And I didn't ask, because I trusted her. If she needed something, I would always say yes. I remember cleaning the house a little before they arrived, not because it was messy, but because I wanted it to feel warm. I wanted her to feel at home, the way she always did when she was younger. I moved a few things around, straightened the cushions on the couch, wiped the kitchen counter. These were small things, maybe unimportant things, but they made me feel like I was preparing for something good. I thought maybe they were coming to ask me about the wedding, to talk about the ceremony, maybe to ask if I wanted to walk her down the aisle, though she already knew the answer to that. Of course I wanted to. But noon arrived, and they walked into my home with the kind of careful energy that fills a room with tension before a single word is spoken. She sat on the couch. He sat next to her. They kept a small space between us, not physically but emotionally. I could feel it. Distance doesn't always come from how far apart you sit. Sometimes it comes from how a person holds their body, how they avoid your eyes, how they fold their hands too tightly in their lap. My daughter looked different that day. Older maybe, or heavier with thoughts she didn't want to share. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, even respectful, but it felt rehearsed. It felt like he had practiced it, maybe in the car, maybe in front of a mirror, maybe in long conversations with her. I don't know. I just know that when he said the words, they were too polished, too smooth, too prepared. He said my presence caused tension. He said they wanted a clean start. He said the wedding was not the place for emotional complications. He said they wanted peace, and that my being there might disturb that peace. And then, with a gentleness that felt sharper than any knife, he said the greatest gift I could give was to step away. Not just from the wedding, from the family, from her life. He said it like a suggestion, but meant it like a decision. I wish I could tell you that I defended myself. I wish I could say I stood up, demanded explanations, asked why, argued, raised my voice, fought back. But I didn't. I sat there and listened, because I was too stunned to do anything else. When life hits you in an unexpected way, sometimes the first reaction is numbness. Not anger, not heartbreak, just silence. My daughter didn't say a word during any of this. Her silence was louder than anything he said. She kept her head down, and I kept waiting for her to look up, to say something, anything. To say she disagreed. To say she didn't want this. To say she still needed me. But she didn't. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. When they left, I stayed in the same chair for a long time. I couldn't move. The house felt different. Smaller. Heavier. As if the walls themselves were holding the words they spoke. I looked around the room and saw pieces of her everywhere, from the framed photos on the shelf to the faded marks on the doorframe, where I measured her height as she grew. All those years were still in the house, but she wasn't. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if those memories mattered more to me than they ever did to her. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about every moment that brought us here. I thought about her childhood. I thought about the divorce. I thought about all the times I tried to be strong for her. I thought about all the sacrifices I made quietly, the ones no one saw. I thought about the years I spent loving her without expecting anything in return. And I thought about the painful truth that maybe love isn't enough to keep a place in someone's life if they decide they no longer want you there. As the night went on, the pain changed shape. At first it was confusion. Then it was shock. Then it settled into something deeper, something quieter, something that felt like a slow break inside my chest. And somewhere around dawn, when the sky turned pale and soft, I understood something I had never wanted to understand. I was holding on to a version of my daughter that no longer existed. She had grown into someone with her own world, her own needs, her own boundaries. And somewhere along the way, without me seeing it, without her saying it, I had become a part of her past rather than her present. That was the hardest truth to accept. I loved her. I still do. I always will. But love doesn't give you ownership. Love doesn't give you guarantees. Love doesn't promise you a place in someone's future simply because you held them in their past. The morning after the conversation, I walked through the house slowly, touching the furniture, the pictures, the things that reminded me of her. I wasn't saying goodbye, not exactly. I was trying to understand the new reality I had been given. Sometimes the hardest part of grief is accepting that the loss has already happened. You're not losing something in the future. You've already lost it. You're just finally seeing it. Later that day, I sat by the window with another cup of coffee, and for the first time since she was born, I didn't know how to be her father. Not in the way I used to be. Not in the way I wanted to be. I didn't know what place I had in her life now. And the truth I kept returning to, the one that hurt the most, was the realization that maybe I didn't have one. I spent hours thinking about whether I should fight for a place in the wedding, whether I should talk to her alone, whether I should explain how much it meant to me. But every time I imagined that conversation, I saw the way she looked at the floor when he spoke, and I knew there was nothing I could say that would change her decision. If she wanted me there, she would have spoken. She didn't. When evening came, I made the choice that felt like it was made for me. If the greatest gift I could give her wedding was to disappear, then maybe that was the only gift I had left to offer. Not because I wanted to, but because I loved her more than I loved my expectations. Love, real love, sometimes means stepping back, even when it hurts. Sometimes it means letting go before you are ready. Sometimes it means accepting that you no longer belong where you once stood proudly. The decision wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in your bones. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't run away. I simply decided to step aside, to remove myself from the space where I was no longer wanted. I don't know if it was the right decision. I still don't. But in that moment, it was the only one that made sense. I wasn't disappearing out of weakness. I wasn't disappearing out of anger. I was disappearing because I loved her enough not to make her choose between me and the life she wanted. And so I did exactly what they asked. I began to disappear. But this is only the beginning of the story. There is more to tell. More pain. More reflection. More truth. The kind of truth you only learn when life forces you to stand alone and look at yourself without the roles you once held. I did not disappear all at once. People imagine disappearance as something immediate, like stepping into a dark room and closing the door behind you. But in real life, it happens slowly. It begins in the mind before it reaches the body. It starts with small choices, small silences, small moments when you decide not to reach out, not to speak, not to interfere. The heart adjusts long before the world notices anything has changed. When I decided to step aside from my daughter's life, I did not pack my bags or turn off my phone or run away. I simply began to loosen my grip on the things I'd been holding for years. The day after they visited, I sat in the backyard for a long time. The grass was uneven because I had meant to trim it earlier that week, but I forgot. A light breeze moved through the trees, and the air smelled like the warm dust of late afternoon. I used to sit back there with my daughter when she was small. She would run around, chasing butterflies that were always just out of reach. When she got tired, she would climb into my lap and rest her head on my chest, listening to my heartbeat like it was music. Back then, the world was simple. I was her whole world, and she was mine. But time changes things. People grow, minds evolve, hearts shift without permission. You don't notice the change when it's happening. You only see it when it's already done. I wondered, as I sat there, when exactly I lost my place in her world. Was it after the divorce? Was it when she left for college? Was it when she met him? Or did the distance begin long before any of that? I replayed memories in my head, searching for clues. I remembered the mornings I made her breakfast before school. The afternoons I helped her practice spelling words. The nights I sat in the hallway waiting for her to fall asleep after she had nightmares. I remembered her first day of high school, how nervous she was, how she asked me to drive her even though she pretended she didn't care. I remembered her first heartbreak when she came home crying, unable to speak, and how she sat beside me in the car while I drove aimlessly, letting her tears fall without forcing her to explain. All these memories felt close enough to touch, but in her life now, they felt far away, like they belonged to someone else. Maybe that someone else was the man I used to be, the version of me she needed then, not the version she sees now. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Just a simple meal, rice, vegetables, and a bit of chicken. I wasn't very hungry, but eating gave me something to do. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel larger. I sat at the table and tried to imagine what her wedding day would look like without me. I pictured her walking down the aisle alone or with someone else, maybe her mother's new husband, maybe a friend, maybe even by herself. I wasn't sure which image hurt more. I imagined her smiling, laughing, surrounded by people celebrating her. I imagined speeches, toasts, music, dancing, and her happiness filling the room. I imagined all of it, every detail, without any place for me. The thought was sharp at first, but the more I sat with it, the more I understood something important. Her wedding was about her joy, not my expectations. If she wanted to start her new life without me standing in the background, then maybe stepping aside wasn't abandonment. Maybe it was respect. Still, the pain didn't disappear just because I understood it logically. Pain doesn't follow logic. It follows the heart. And mine was heavy. The next morning, I woke up with no real plan. I walked into the living room and stared at the family photos. They covered the wall near the staircase. Photos from birthdays, vacations, holidays, graduations. Each one told a story. Each one held a moment when we were still close. I stood there for a long time, running my finger along the edges of the frames like I was touching the memories themselves. I didn't want to take them down. I didn't want to erase anything. I wanted to hold on to what my life used to be. I wanted to remember the version of me who mattered. But I also knew that memories can become traps if you hold them too tightly. They can keep you looking backward instead of forward. They can keep you waiting for something that will never return. Later in the afternoon, I got a call from my sister. She had heard from someone in the family that the wedding was coming soon. She asked if I was excited. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out for a moment. I finally told her the truth. I expected her to be shocked or angry on my behalf. But she was quiet. After a long pause, she said something that stayed with me. Sometimes we love people the way we think love should look, not the way they understand it. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. But as the day went on, her words settled in my heart. Maybe the love I had given my daughter, quiet, steady, protective, was not the kind she needed as an adult. People change the way they understand love as they grow. What once felt comforting might later feel suffocating. What once felt supportive might later feel like interference. I began to realize that the love I had given her for years might not fit the shape of her life anymore. That night, I made a decision. If I was truly going to step aside, I had to do it fully. Not halfway, not with resentment, not with hidden hope that she would change her mind. I had to do it with acceptance. I had to disappear in a way that felt dignified, not defeated. So the next morning, I wrote her a letter. I sat at the same kitchen table where I used to read her school papers and sign permission slips. I took a blank sheet of paper and began writing slowly, choosing each word with care. I told her I loved her. Truly, deeply, and unconditionally. I told her that I wanted her wedding day to be perfect, filled with peace and joy. I told her I understood that she needed a clean start and that I respected her decision. I told her I would not attend the wedding, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to bring even a shadow of discomfort to her special day. I told her she deserved happiness, and I hoped she found it in every part of her life. I didn't write about my pain. I didn't write about the hurt or the confusion. I didn't ask her for explanations or apologies. The letter wasn't about me. It was a gift, just as they asked for. A quiet gift. A final act of love that asked for nothing in return. I left the letter in an envelope and placed it near the front door, where she would see it if she stopped by. I didn't know if she would, but I left it there anyway. That same afternoon, I drove to the edge of town, near a lake I used to take her to when she was little. It was a peaceful place, surrounded by tall trees and still water that reflected the sky like a mirror. She used to feed the ducks there, laughing each time one waddled too close. I hadn't been there in years, but something drew me back. I sat on a bench overlooking the water. The sunlight was soft, turning the lake's surface into a sheet of gold. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, making the leaves rustle like whispers. Sitting there, I realized something important. Disappearing didn't mean losing myself. It didn't mean giving up on life. It simply meant creating space where I no longer imposed myself. It meant letting her build her own world without feeling obligated to include me. As I sat by the lake, I thought about the man I had been for so many years. A father who tried to fill every role, every gap, every need. A man who gave without expecting anything in return. But maybe somewhere along the way, I forgot the line between being present and being necessary. And maybe, to my daughter, I no longer felt necessary. That thought was painful, but it wasn't cruel. It was honest. I stayed by the lake until late afternoon. Then I drove home slowly, taking roads I hadn't driven in a long time. I passed places that held memories. Her old school, the park where she learned to ride a bike, the corner store where we used to buy ice cream. Each place was a reminder of a life that no longer belonged to me in the same way. When I got home, I found an envelope at the door. My daughter's handwriting on it. For a moment, my heart stopped. I stood there holding the envelope, feeling its weight, knowing that whatever was inside would either hurt more or help me breathe again. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Her letter was short, only a few lines. She thanked me for understanding. She said she needed space. She said she appreciated my respect for her wishes. And she said she hoped that in time, things would feel easier for both of us. That was all. No apology, no explanation, no love written between the lines, but also no anger, no blame, no rejection in the words themselves. Just distance. Clear, quiet, intentional distance. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to save it, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. Throwing it away felt wrong. Keeping it felt heavy. So the drawer became the compromise. That night, I realized something that would shape everything that came after. Disappearing wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting that the world would continue without noticing you were gone. And the people you love most might not miss you in the way you hoped they would. That realization wasn't cruel. It was just true. In the days that followed, I started adjusting to the idea of stepping back. I didn't call her. I didn't message her. I didn't ask about wedding plans. I didn't check social media. I let the distance settle naturally, like dust on the windowsill. And slowly, painfully, I began learning how to live in the quiet again. But this was only the beginning of my disappearance. There was more to let go of, more to understand, more to grieve. And the deeper I went into this journey, the more I began to realize that stepping aside was not just about her wedding. It was about redefining myself in a world where my role had changed without my permission. I remember waking up the next morning with a heavy feeling in my chest. It was the kind of weight you don't shake off with a cup of coffee or a quick walk outside. It was a deeper heaviness, the kind that grows from a mixture of confusion, rejection, and the worry that something inside the family was shifting without me understanding why. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, holding my hands together, wondering what I had done in all these years to make my son-in-law speak to me in such a way. The words from the night before still echoed in my head, sharp, unexpected, and painful. I kept asking myself the same question. Did I mishear him? Did he really mean it the way it sounded? But no matter how many times I replayed the moments in my mind, it all came back the same. The tone, the look in his eyes, the finality of his words. It felt like a door had been closed on me without warning. I tried to move through the house, doing small things here and there, folding a blanket, filling the kettle with water, arranging the books on the table, but everything felt strangely quiet. The house had never felt that empty before, not even after my wife passed away. Somehow, this silence carried a different kind of loneliness. It felt like being left out while still being present. Eventually, I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window. I watched people walking outside, some with families, some alone, some rushing to work, some strolling slowly as if the day meant nothing urgent to them. I wondered which one of those people I used to be. I wondered whether I had ever seen the signs that my daughter's husband didn't see me as part of their picture. A gentle breeze came through the window, carrying the smell of morning air. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pretended everything was normal. Pretended that the night before had been a misunderstanding. Pretended that families didn't sometimes drift without meaning to. But when I opened my eyes again, the truth remained. A part of me wanted to call my daughter right away, to ask her what happened, to ask her if everything was all right. But another part of me stopped. I didn't want to put her in a difficult position. I didn't want her to feel torn between her husband and her father. And most of all, I didn't want to seem like I was forcing myself where I wasn't wanted. So I stayed quiet. I sat with my thoughts instead. Later that afternoon, I received a message from her. Not a call, just a short message saying she hoped I was well and that she would talk to me soon. Something about the tone of the message felt careful, almost nervous, as if she was choosing her words the way one chooses fragile things from a shelf. I didn't know what it meant, but I sensed she was trying to keep peace. I replied with something simple. I'm okay. Take your time. But I wasn't okay. Not really. I tried going outside for a walk, hoping fresh air might clear my mind. The neighborhood was the same as always. Children on bicycles, a couple walking their dog, someone mowing the grass across the street. But I walked slowly, my steps heavy, my thoughts even heavier. Every sound, every sight reminded me of the years when I used to walk with my daughter at this same time of day. She used to hold my hand when she was little, asking me the most random questions. Why the sky was blue, why cats slept so much, why adults always seemed tired. I remembered laughing, lifting her up, telling her stories I made up on the spot. Back then, I never imagined a future where I would feel like an inconvenience to her new family. When I returned home, the house felt even quieter than before. I sat down again, this time at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. I started talking quietly to myself, something I hadn't done in years. I said her name softly, almost like a whisper. I said I missed her. I said I wished things were different. I said I wished her husband understood that I wasn't trying to take anything from him, that I wasn't trying to interfere, that I wasn't trying to be a burden. Hours passed, and I didn't do much. I just sat with my thoughts. The sun slowly moved across the room, changing the color of the light on the walls. I watched the shadows shift, and for a moment, I felt like time had slowed down just for me, like the world around me was moving, but I was standing still. Later that evening, the phone finally rang. It was my daughter's voice, soft and uncertain. She asked if I had time to talk. I said yes, though the truth was that I had been waiting all day for this moment. She hesitated before speaking again. I could hear something in her voice. Worry, maybe guilt, maybe confusion. She said she wanted to explain what happened the night before. She said her husband had been stressed, overwhelmed with the wedding preparations, and that he didn't mean to hurt me. But as she spoke, her voice trembled slightly, as if she wasn't entirely convinced by her own words. I listened quietly, letting her talk. She said her husband felt pressured by the idea of family expectations. She said he sometimes felt like he couldn't meet all of them. She said he didn't want the wedding to turn into something complicated. And then, after a long pause, she admitted something that cut deeper than anything else. She said he believed I was too involved, that I asked too many questions, that my presence made him feel like he was being judged, and that somewhere in all that stress and misunderstanding, he said something he shouldn't have. When she finished speaking, the silence between us was long and heavy. I finally asked her one question. Do you feel the same way? She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was small. She said she didn't feel that way, not exactly, but that she needed peace in her home. She needed things to be easy between her and her husband. She said she didn't want to start her married life with conflict. And then she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Dad, I just need you to give us some space. At least for now. Those words felt gentle, but they landed with the same weight as the ones her husband spoke the night before. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell her how much it hurt. I simply told her that I understood. I told her I wanted her to be happy, and if giving her space was what she needed, then I would give it. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand. I kept replaying our conversation, her tone, the pauses between her words. I realized that my daughter was trying to find balance, trying to be a good wife, while still wanting to be a good daughter. And in that struggle, I was the piece she felt she had to step away from. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years I raised her alone after losing my wife. All the moments we shared. All the times we promised each other that we would always stay close. I wondered if this was what growing up meant. Children walking into their new lives while parents quietly learn how to step back. The next morning, I woke early, even though I hadn't slept well. I sat at the kitchen table and made a decision. A quiet one. A painful one. But one that felt necessary. I would step out of the picture, not out of anger or resentment, but out of love. If my presence made things harder for her, then maybe my absence would make things easier. Maybe it would give her the peace she needed. Maybe it would show her that I cared more about her happiness than about my own feelings. So I started packing a small bag. Not everything. Just a few clothes, some important papers, and a picture of my daughter from when she was a child. The one where she was smiling up at me with bright eyes and messy hair. I didn't know where I would go yet, but I knew I had to leave. Before I walked out, I took one last look at the house. It held so many memories. Birthdays, late-night talks, laughter, tears. I whispered a quiet goodbye, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. The house, the memories, or the part of my life that was now changing. And with that, I closed the door behind me and stepped outside into the morning air. The world looked the same, but something inside me felt different. I walked slowly, carrying nothing but a small bag and a heart full of unspoken feelings. I didn't know where this path would lead. I didn't know how long I would stay away. But in that moment, I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is stepping out of their way. When I stepped out into the morning, I didn't have a plan. I only had a direction, and even that felt temporary. My feet moved before my mind did, carrying me down the familiar streets I had walked 1,000 times before. But this time, everything looked different. Or maybe it was me who felt different. I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because I needed time to breathe. Time to understand what I had just done. Time to accept the idea that, for the first time in many years, I was truly alone again. The morning air was cool, and a thin mist hung over the sidewalks. I could hear birds scattered across the trees, their calls soft and distant. It should have been peaceful. Maybe to someone else, it would have been. But inside me, there was a quiet ache that refused to settle. I tried to comfort myself with the thought that I had made the right decision, that stepping away was what my daughter needed. But good decisions sometimes hurt more than bad ones. And this one hurt deeply. I reached the bus stop without thinking about it. I hadn't taken a bus in years. Most of the time, I drove everywhere or simply walked. But standing there with my small bag, I felt strangely like a younger version of myself, someone who used to navigate life with very little and had learned to accept a kind of simplicity. I checked my pockets and found enough money to get me somewhere farther away. Not too far, but far enough that I wouldn't be hovering near my daughter's new life. When the bus arrived, I stepped on without looking back. The driver gave me a tired nod, and I returned it. I found a seat near the middle and placed my bag on the floor. The bus smelled faintly of old leather and rain. There were a few passengers, an older woman reading a small paperback book, a young man with headphones, a couple whispering to each other near the back. No one looked at me. No one knew me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't someone's father or someone's neighbor or someone with a place. I was just another quiet face on the bus, blending into the background. As the bus pulled away, I watched the town fade from view. The houses, the shops, the trees I had grown familiar with over the years, they all passed by my window like scenes from a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. I imagined my daughter waking up, making breakfast, talking to her husband, preparing for her day. I wondered if she thought about me yet. I wondered if she would notice my absence or if she believed I was simply giving her the space she asked for. I wondered if she would call. And then I told myself not to wait for that call. Not for a while. The bus ride was long and quiet. We moved through small towns and open stretches of road where the fields seemed endless. I watched them pass like waves of gold and green. Something about the open space made me feel both lost and free at the same time. I wasn't running from my life, but I was stepping away from it, giving it room to breathe, giving myself room to understand. I got off the bus in a small town I had never heard of. It wasn't far from where I had lived, but it felt like a completely different world. The streets were clean and quiet. There were little shops with handwritten signs, a bakery that smelled like fresh bread, and a small park with benches placed neatly under tall trees. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my bag, unsure of where to go. For a moment, I felt like a traveler without a destination. I found a simple motel near the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and the man at the front desk spoke in a friendly tone that made me feel a little less alone. I paid for a few nights, not knowing how long I would stay. The room was small with plain walls and a single bed. The window overlooked a parking lot, and beyond that, a stretch of trees that seemed to sway gently in the wind. I sat on the bed and let out a long, slow breath. The silence in the room felt different from the silence at home. This silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't filled with things unsaid or memories that clung to every corner. It was empty, and maybe that emptiness was something I needed. I placed my small bag on the floor and sat there for a long time. I thought about calling my daughter again, just to tell her I was all right. But I didn't. I didn't want to burden her with worry or make her feel guilty. She had her own life now, her own world to build, her own relationship to nurture. I didn't want to be the shadow standing behind her door. So I stayed silent. Later that evening, I walked through the town. The sun was beginning to set, and warm colors stretched across the sky. People were closing their shops, sweeping their doorsteps, talking quietly with neighbors. Everything felt gentle, almost peaceful. I found myself slowing down, letting the calmness of the place settle inside me. I bought a sandwich from a small deli and sat on a bench near the park to eat it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As I sat there, I noticed an older couple walking hand in hand. They moved slowly, taking small steps, talking softly to each other. Something about the way they walked reminded me of what I used to imagine for my future, growing old with my wife, sharing simple moments, watching our daughter build her own life. But life had not unfolded that way. And though I had accepted that many years ago, grief sometimes finds new ways to appear when you least expect it. That night, back at the motel, sleep came slowly. I lay on the small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional sound of a car passing by. I wondered if my daughter had noticed I was gone. I wondered if she felt relieved or worried or simply unaware. I wondered if my absence would make things calmer for her and her husband. I hoped so. I hoped my choice wouldn't become a weight on her shoulders. Over the next few days, I settled into a quiet routine. In the mornings, I would walk to the bakery for coffee. The woman behind the counter always greeted me with a warm smile, as if she had known me for years. I appreciated that small kindness more than she realized. I would sit outside at a little table and watch people going about their day. Children heading to school, workers carrying tools, elderly men reading newspapers. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere, and even though I didn't quite belong here, I felt like a harmless observer, someone drifting through their world without disturbing it. After breakfast, I would walk around town, sometimes visiting the park, sometimes wandering down side streets just to see what was there. I didn't talk to many people, but the quiet company of strangers helped soften the loneliness inside me. I began to appreciate the simple rhythms of the town, the slow pace, the soft conversations, the gentle way time seemed to move. In the afternoons, I would return to the motel and rest. I would look out the window at the trees swaying in the wind. I would think about my daughter and wonder what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she was adjusting to her new life. I imagined her cooking dinner with her husband, decorating their place, planning their future. I imagined her smiling. That image made the ache in my chest feel both deeper and lighter at the same time. One evening, after several days of silence, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped, though I tried to steady myself before looking. It was a message from my daughter. She asked if I was all right. She said she hadn't heard from me since our last conversation and wanted to make sure I was okay. Something in her words felt gentle, but there was also a sense of distance, as if she wasn't sure what the right tone to use was. I stared at her message for a long time. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, how I had left, how I was staying in a motel, how I missed her more than she could imagine. But I didn't want to complicate her life. I didn't want her to feel guilty for asking for space. So I wrote something simple. I'm doing fine. Take care of yourself. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. I was trying to be fine. I was trying to give her what she needed. And maybe, in time, I would feel fine too. Maybe distance wasn't the end of love. Maybe it was just a different shape of it. As the days turned into a week, I started to feel a strange sense of acceptance. My life had changed, but change was not always the enemy. Sometimes it was a quiet teacher, showing you things you were too busy to notice before. I realized I had spent so much of my life taking care of others that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had forgotten what it felt like to be still. I didn't know how long I would stay in that town, but each morning felt a little lighter than the one before. The ache didn't disappear, but it softened around the edges. I wasn't healing completely, but I was learning how to hold the pain without letting it consume me. I began to understand that stepping away didn't mean disappearing forever. It meant allowing space for new understanding, new balance, new growth. And somewhere beneath the quiet of each day, I held on to a simple hope that one day, when the time was right, my daughter would reach out not from guilt or obligation, but from a place of genuine connection. A place where love wasn't tangled with pressure. A place where we could meet again not as people standing on opposite sides of a wound, but as family finding each other after a long walk through silence. That hope kept me going. It kept me breathing through the loneliness. It kept me looking at the world with gentleness instead of bitterness. It reminded me that love sometimes asks for patience, and patience sometimes asks for solitude. And in that small town, in that quiet motel room, I waited, not with expectation, but with an open heart, hoping that the distance I had given her would someday bring us closer again. The days continued to pass quietly, one blending into the next with a kind of soft sameness that I had not experienced in years. There was no rush to anything, no schedules to keep, no responsibilities pulling at my sleeves. In a strange way, that simplicity brought a small comfort. But it also gave me a lot of time to think, sometimes more than I wanted. Most mornings, I woke before the sun fully rose. The motel room always felt slightly cold at that hour, the kind of chill that made me pull the blanket closer for a moment before I pushed myself to sit up. I would stand by the window for a while, watching the first light spread slowly across the sky. The quiet outside felt almost sacred in those moments, as if the world held its breath before beginning another day. And in that stillness, I found a kind of peace, even if it was wrapped in a lingering ache. After freshening up, I walked to the bakery again. It had become my small ritual, the one constant in my new routine. The familiar chime of the doorbell, the warm smell of baked bread, the gentle voice of the woman behind the counter. It all made me feel less like a stranger. She always greeted me with the same simple kindness, a kindness that didn't ask questions and didn't expect anything in return. I appreciated that more than she knew. I sat at the same table each morning, sipping my coffee slowly, watching people pass by. I noticed small details that most days I would have overlooked. An old man adjusting his hat as he walked, a mother holding her child's hand, teenagers laughing about something I would never understand, a delivery worker checking his clipboard twice as if afraid to miss a detail. Everything around me seemed ordinary, yet somehow beautiful in its own quiet rhythm. Sometimes I wondered how many mornings I had rushed through in my life without noticing anything at all. How many moments I had passed without realizing they were moments. When you're younger, you think time is endless. You believe you have all the days in the world to do everything you dream of. You think your loved ones will always be there, waiting for you. But life teaches you differently, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. And sitting there in that small town, watching the world move at its own pace, I felt the weight of all the moments I had hurried through. One day, as I sat outside with my coffee, I saw a father and daughter walking by. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, holding his hand with that natural confidence children have around a parent they trust completely. She was telling him a story, an animated one, full of gestures and wide eyes, and he was listening with a soft smile, nodding now and then, giving her the kind of attention that makes a child feel seen. That sight pulled at something deep inside me. It brought back the years when my daughter was that age, when she believed I was the strongest person in the world. I remembered the way she used to look up at me, as if everything I said had a kind of magic to it. I remembered taking her to the park, pushing her on the swing, catching her small hands as she jumped into my arms. I remembered how she used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives, her breath soft and steady. I remembered those little moments that had once been so ordinary, but now felt precious. Watching that father and daughter, I felt a sting of sadness, not because they had something I didn't, but because I had once held something so beautiful and hadn't realized how fleeting it would be. You raise a child believing you will always stand close in their life, but the truth is, the world slowly pulls them forward. They grow, they learn, they build a life that eventually exists beyond your reach. And you stand there, watching from a distance, hoping that you taught them enough to walk confidently, even when you're not beside them. As the pair disappeared down the street, I let out a long, quiet breath. I told myself that life moves in seasons. Some seasons are full of closeness, warmth, connection. Others are filled with distance, silence, and learning to let go. I was in one of those latter seasons now, and though it was hard, I knew it had a purpose. At least I hoped it did. By the end of my first week in that town, I decided to explore a bit farther. Not with any particular goal in mind, just to clear my thoughts. I walked along streets I hadn't seen yet, passing houses with gardens neatly decorated, shops with charming hand-painted signs, and small cafes tucked between old buildings. The air carried the smell of something sweet, maybe pastries or caramel, drifting from a nearby bakery I hadn't visited yet. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of a quiet residential area. There was a small lake surrounded by a walking path. The surface of the water was calm, reflecting the blue sky with such clarity that it looked almost unreal. I sat on a bench near the edge and listened to the gentle sound of the water shifting against the shore. A few ducks drifted by lazily, unbothered by anything around them. The tranquility of the place washed over me like a warm blanket. As I sat there, I thought about my daughter again. I wondered if she had noticed the quiet space I had created around her. I wondered if she missed me, or if she had settled comfortably into her new life. The truth was, I didn't want her to be burdened by my absence. I wanted her to live freely, to enjoy her marriage, to build the life she dreamed of. But somewhere in the depths of my heart, I hoped she would think of me sometimes. I hoped she would remember the years we spent building our own little world together. I hoped some part of her still needed me, even if only in small ways. My phone remained silent. I checked it less often as the days passed, partly because I didn't want to wait for something that might not come, and partly because I wanted to focus on being present in the quiet space I had created. But still, every so often, when I heard a buzz or a hum from anywhere nearby, a small part of me wondered if it might be her. Hope can be stubborn like that. It stays even when you try to quiet it. That evening, I returned to the motel feeling tired but calmer. I lay on the bed and closed my eyes, letting the stillness of the room settle around me. I didn't feel at home there, not exactly, but I didn't feel out of place either. It was simply a resting point, a pause between chapters of my life. I didn't know what the next chapter would look like. Honestly, I didn't know if I was ready to think that far ahead. But for the moment, the quiet was enough. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When I walked into the bakery, the woman behind the counter smiled a little wider than usual. She reached under the counter and handed me a small paper bag. She told me it was on the house. Inside were 2 pastries, one with a fruit filling and another with chocolate. She said she noticed I always came alone and wanted to give me something sweet to brighten my morning. That small gesture warmed something inside me. I thanked her sincerely, and she nodded with a gentle expression in her eyes. Sometimes the kindness of strangers carries a different power than the kindness of people you know. There's no history behind it, no expectation, no weight. Just simple humanity. And in those moments, you realize how much good still exists quietly in the world. As I ate one of the pastries on my usual bench outside, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for anything grand or life-changing, but for the gentle reminders that I wasn't invisible, that even in a moment of painful transition, life still had small offerings of warmth. Later that afternoon, I returned to the lake. It had become the place where my thoughts felt most manageable. I sat there for a long time, letting the sun warm my face. The quiet hum of nature around me felt comforting. The water moved softly, the trees rustled in the breeze, the birds moved in and out of the branches above. I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in a long while. But as the day wore on, I began to feel a new restlessness inside me. Not the kind that demands immediate action, but the kind that nudges you gently, reminding you that life still existed outside of this quiet pause. I realized that I couldn't stay in that motel forever. I had stepped away to give my daughter space, not to disappear from life entirely. I needed to figure out what came next. Whether that meant returning home someday, or building something new for myself somewhere else, I wasn't sure yet. But I knew I needed to start thinking about it. That evening, I took out a notebook I had carried with me, one I hadn't opened in years. I bought a pen from the small store near the motel and sat at the desk in the room. I began writing, not anything structured or planned, just letting my thoughts fall onto the page. Memories of my daughter, feelings I hadn't voiced, fears I had pushed aside, hopes I didn't dare speak aloud. I wrote until my hand felt tired and my heart felt lighter. Writing has a way of revealing things you didn't know were inside you. As the words filled the page, I began to understand something I had been avoiding. I was grieving. Not grieving a death, but grieving a change, grieving a shift in my place in my daughter's life, grieving the ending of a chapter one wasn't ready to leave behind. And grief is not something you walk away from by simply changing location. It follows you quietly until you finally face it. I wrote through the evening and deep into the night, filling page after page. And when I finally set the pen down, I felt something loosen inside me. I felt a small measure of acceptance, a small measure of peace. Change had come, whether I wanted it or not, but I could choose how to move through it. In the days that followed, I continued my simple routine, but something inside me had settled. I no longer looked at my phone with the same expectation. I no longer lingered on the streets wondering if I should go back home or stay farther away. Instead, I focused on the day in front of me, the quiet mornings, the gentle afternoons, the peaceful evenings. I learned to breathe slowly again. I learned to be patient with myself. And though I still missed my daughter every single day, the ache no longer felt sharp. It had softened into something I could carry without losing my balance. I held on to a simple truth. Love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like stepping back. Sometimes it looks like waiting quietly. Sometimes it looks like trusting that the bond you built won't disappear just because life shifted. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my daughter would reach out more. I didn't know if her husband's words represented a temporary crack or a lasting wall. But I chose to believe that time had its own way of easing tensions. That love, even strained love, had its own way of finding a path through silence. And as I continued living in that gentle rhythm, I found myself beginning to heal. Not completely, not suddenly, but slowly, in the quiet spaces of each passing day. And sometimes, that slow healing is enough to keep you walking forward, even when you cannot see the road ahead. The weeks continued to pass in the small town, each day folding gently into the next. There was a rhythm I hadn't expected to find, one that had nothing to do with schedules or obligations, but with the quiet unfolding of life around me. I walked through the streets each morning, noticing things I had ignored in my own hometown. The way the sunlight touched the rooftops, the way the wind moved through the leaves, the way strangers' smiles carried a fleeting warmth that lingered just enough to make a day feel lighter. I would pause in front of shop windows, admiring displays I might never buy from, and yet appreciating the simple artistry and care that went into them. I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to simply observe the world, to move through it without expectation, without demand, without pressure. At first, The loneliness was sharp, like a constant ache that refused to fade. I had spent so many years surrounded by family, friends, routines, and responsibilities that the sudden absence of all those familiar things left a hollow space inside me. But slowly, I learned to sit with that hollow, to let it exist without turning it into despair. I learned that silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes, silence is where the heart finds space to breathe, where grief begins to untangle itself from guilt, and where clarity begins to emerge in its own time. I took long walks in the early mornings when the town was just waking up. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and earth. The sky would slowly shift from deep navy to soft pinks and oranges, and I would watch as the world slowly became visible. In those moments, I felt connected to something larger than my immediate worries. I thought about my daughter often, wondering if she missed me even slightly, wondering if she thought about the life we had shared, the small routines and rituals we had built together. I reminded myself that my absence was meant to give her freedom, to allow her to exist fully in her new life without interference. And yet, the ache of separation remained. One day, I found myself at the lake I had visited many times before. The water shimmered under the late afternoon sun, the surface smooth except for small ripples where a breeze passed over it. I sat on the familiar bench and let my gaze wander across the water, watching ducks glide gracefully, their movements calm and unhurried. For a moment, I thought about my daughter as a little girl, the way she used to run along the edges of ponds, squealing with delight as she chased after birds or tossed pebbles into the water. I remembered picking her up when she fell, brushing the dirt off her knees, holding her close until the tears stopped. Those memories made me ache, not just for the past, but for the life we had shared before everything became complicated. Over the following days, I began noticing other people in the town more consciously. There was a young man who walked the same path every morning, headphones in, nodding to the rhythm of music I could not hear. There was an elderly woman who tended to her flower garden with patience that seemed infinite. A middle-aged man who always bought the same paper from the corner shop and smiled politely at the clerk. Observing them became a quiet exercise in empathy. I realized that everyone carried their own burdens, their own worries, their own silent ache. And in acknowledging that, my own loneliness seemed less suffocating. I also began to notice how small acts of kindness could ripple quietly through daily life. One morning, the bakery woman handed me a pastry with a gentle smile. Another day, a stranger at the bus stop held the door for me, speaking a few polite words that warmed the chest more than expected. I started offering smiles in return, nods, and small gestures of acknowledgement. Each exchange was brief, fleeting, and yet they reminded me that connection doesn't always require intimacy or obligation. It can be simple, passing, and still meaningful. Writing remained my constant companion. Each evening, I would sit at the small desk in my motel room and let words pour out onto paper. I wrote about my daughter, about my own fears, about the moments I had lost and the moments I hoped to reclaim. I wrote about the ache in my chest, the weight of absence, the silent longing for reconciliation. Sometimes the words were messy, raw, and unpolished. Sometimes they made no sense at all. But writing became a way of processing the inexpressible, of giving shape to emotions that refused to be named. By the time I set the pen down, I felt lighter, as if I had transferred some of the weight from my heart onto the page. One evening, while walking back from the bakery with a small loaf of bread, I noticed a family in the park. A father was tossing a ball to his child, laughing as the little one ran and stumbled and got back up again. The child's mother stood nearby, clapping and smiling, her eyes soft with affection. I stopped for a moment, watching them. There was nothing extraordinary about the scene, and yet it filled me with a quiet longing. I thought about my daughter, about the family she was building, and I felt both joy for her and a sharp pang of distance. The realization that life moves forward even as you stand still was painful, yet undeniable. I started reflecting more deeply on the nature of love and sacrifice. My decision to step away from my daughter's life had been born out of love. It had not been easy, and it had not been free of sorrow. But I understood now that sometimes love requires letting go, creating space for others to grow, even if it means enduring the ache of separation. It was a lesson that no one truly teaches you. It is only learned through experience, through quiet suffering, through reflection and patience. Sleep became a ritual I looked forward to, though it was often elusive at first. Lying on the bed in the small motel room, I would replay the day in my mind, focusing on small, quiet moments, the rustle of leaves, the smell of fresh bread, the smile of a stranger. Gradually, those moments became anchors, helping me drift into sleep even when the loneliness pressed against my chest. Night after night, I felt the edges of grief soften, as if the quiet of the town and the gentle rhythm of daily life were teaching me patience, acceptance, and resilience. I also began to notice subtle changes within myself. I walked taller, my movements slower and more deliberate. I spoke less to others, but listened more intently. I smiled more genuinely, without expecting a return smile. The small rituals, morning walks, visits to the bakery, time by the lake, evenings spent writing, had created a foundation of stability. I was learning to exist in the quiet spaces between people, in the gaps of life that often feel uncomfortable or empty, and to find peace there. Occasionally, I thought about reaching out to my daughter again, but I resisted. I reminded myself of the reason I had left, to give her space, to let her build her life without interference, to honor her need for distance. Even though my heart ached to hear her voice, even though I longed to see her smile, I understood that timing mattered. Connection could not be forced. Love, I realized, must sometimes wait patiently for the right moment to return. The small town began to feel like a temporary sanctuary. I met a few people casually, enough to exchange polite greetings and occasional brief conversations. None of them knew my story, none of them needed to. And that anonymity, that freedom from expectations, was a gift I had not anticipated. I realized that while distance from family had caused pain, it had also allowed me to rediscover myself, to see who I was beyond the roles of father, provider, or caretaker. I began to think more about forgiveness, not just of others, but of myself. I had carried guilt for years, guilt for raising a child alone, guilt for not protecting my family from pain, guilt for not being enough in ways I could not define. I realized that stepping away was not an act of abandonment, but an act of love. And in forgiving myself for the ways I had fallen short, I could begin to heal, to accept that imperfection does not mean failure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and lavender, I sat by the lake and watched the reflections of the trees and the water merge into a gentle blur. I thought about time, the way it moves relentlessly forward, the way it reshapes life even when we wish it wouldn't. I thought about my daughter, about the life she was building, about the man she had chosen to share it with. I thought about my decision to step away and the quiet courage it had taken. And in that reflection, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Life does not pause for grief or regret. It flows forward, and we must learn to flow with it, to accept it, to trust that love can endure even through distance. I also began noticing small joys in everyday life. A warm cup of coffee on a chilly morning. The way sunlight streamed through the leaves and painted patterns on the pavement. The laughter of children playing in the park. The simple satisfaction of writing thoughts onto a page without judgment. These moments reminded me that life carries beauty even amidst sorrow. They reminded me that healing is not a grand event, but a collection of small, gentle realizations that build quietly over time. As the weeks stretched into months, my connection with my daughter remained distant, but not severed. I sent occasional messages, short, unobtrusive, gentle. No demands, no expectations. Just a quiet acknowledgement of love, a reminder that I was present in spirit even if not in proximity. And though her replies were brief, they carried warmth, a subtle reassurance that the bond we shared had not vanished entirely. I began to realize that my absence had not created a void but a space. A space for her to grow, for her to find balance, for her to understand that love is not always about presence, but sometimes about respect, patience, and trust. And for me, that same space allowed self-reflection, growth, and acceptance. It allowed me to explore who I was beyond the role of father and caregiver, to confront my own vulnerabilities, and to build a sense of inner peace. One particularly quiet evening, I found myself watching the stars appear in the sky. The air was cool, the town silent, the world holding its breath as night settled over everything. I felt a deep gratitude for the journey I had taken, The decision to step away, the loneliness, the reflections, the small joys, the quiet healing. I realized that life is not always about being close to those we love, but about understanding the depth of love through distance, patience, and endurance. I thought about the lessons this time had taught me. That love requires courage, that patience can be an act of devotion, that absence can sometimes be the greatest gift, that grief and healing are intertwined, that self-discovery is possible even in moments of profound loneliness. And in that stillness, I felt a quiet strength settle into me, a reminder that while life can be painful, it can also be beautiful, even in its most ordinary moments. The months passed with this gentle rhythm. I continued walking, writing, observing, and reflecting. I continued to live in a state of quiet hope, holding on to the belief that one day, when the time was right, my daughter and I would reconnect fully, not from obligation, not from guilt, but from love and understanding. And in the meantime, I allowed myself to be present in the world, to find peace in the small moments, to nurture my own spirit, and to trust that life, with all its complexities, would unfold as it should. I had learned that stepping away does not mean losing connection, that sometimes love is measured not by how close we remain, but by how much we respect the growth and choices of those we care about. That healing, both for myself and for my daughter, requires patience, acceptance, and unwavering hope. And that even in absence, love can endure quietly, persistently, and profoundly. The days in the small town settled into a gentle rhythm, each one flowing quietly into the next. I woke with the sun, took slow walks through the streets, and returned to the motel in the afternoons to rest and write. Life had become simpler, slower, and yet more meaningful than I could have imagined. I had traded the chaos of my former routines for the stillness of observation and reflection, and in that stillness, I discovered aspects of myself I had long ignored. I began to notice the small patterns of life around me more deliberately. The elderly man who came to the park each morning to feed the birds, the young woman who jogged past the lake at the same hour every day, the store clerk who always remembered my order without asking. These small repetitions, unnoticed before, had become markers of time and continuity. They reminded me that life moves on steadily, even when individual moments feel slow or uncertain. Observing them became a quiet meditation, a practice of presence I had never truly learned. The motel room, once stark and lonely, had become a refuge. I decorated it with small things I found along my walks, a pressed flower from a neighbor's garden, a smooth stone from the lake's edge, a postcard from a small shop. Each item was a symbol, a tangible reminder that I could shape my environment to reflect the internal peace I was slowly cultivating. I would sit at the desk in the evenings and write, letting memories and emotions flow freely onto paper. I chronicled my journey, my reflections, my longing, and my small triumphs in adapting to solitude. Writing had become both a release and a map, guiding me through the labyrinth of my thoughts and emotions. One afternoon, I ventured further than I had before, walking toward the outskirts of the town. The streets became quieter, lined with older homes, some abandoned, others carefully maintained. I passed a small park where children played, their laughter carrying across the empty streets, and I felt a bittersweet ache for my own daughter. I remembered her as a child, running through parks, discovering the world with unfiltered curiosity. I remembered the small moments I had cherished, holding her hand, reading stories, tucking her into bed. Those memories were a comfort and a sorrow all at once. At the edge of town, I found a small bookstore tucked between two older buildings. The sign above the door was faded, and the windows were dusted with the fingerprints of countless hands. I stepped inside and was greeted by the familiar smell of paper, ink, and time itself. The store was small, crowded with shelves of books from floor to ceiling, each one a doorway to a different world. I wandered through the aisles slowly, touching spines, reading small snippets, letting myself be drawn into stories I had long forgotten I loved. For a few hours, I lost myself in worlds beyond my own, and it felt like a balm to my mind and heart. By the time I returned to the motel, the sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, and the world felt hushed, as if it had paused to let me catch my breath. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day. The small excursions, The gentle observations, the quiet connections with strangers, they had begun to create a sense of purpose, a rhythm that was comforting and grounding. I realized that solitude does not mean emptiness. It can be fertile ground for growth, self-discovery, and understanding. I also noticed subtle changes in myself. My thoughts were calmer, less restless. My heart, though still tender with longing for my daughter, was no longer tightly wounded with anxiety or regret. I was learning to carry the ache of separation without letting it overwhelm me. I was beginning to understand that love is not always measured by proximity or constant interaction. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is the willingness to step back so that someone else can grow, even when that growth happens apart from you. One evening, as I walked along the edge of the lake, I saw a young couple sitting on a bench, talking softly, holding hands. Their quiet intimacy was unassuming yet profound, a reminder that love can exist gently, without spectacle or drama. I watched them for a moment, feeling a mix of longing and hope. I thought about my daughter, about the man she had chosen, and I realized that my love for her meant wanting her happiness, even if it was not with me or shaped by my desires. Love, I understood, is sometimes an act of letting go. I continued to write each night, and in my writing, I began to confront deeper truths about myself. I reflected on the years I had spent trying to control outcomes, trying to protect those I loved, trying to manage life in ways that were impossible. I recognized my own limitations, my own mistakes, and my own humanity. And in acknowledging them, I found a quiet release. I forgave myself for the ways I had fallen short, and I began to cultivate compassion, not only for my daughter and her choices, but for myself as well. Days turned into weeks, and the town became a backdrop for both reflection and quiet growth. I began to notice the subtle beauty in routine, the rising sun, the changing light over the lake, the predictable yet comforting movements of people around me. Each morning, I would take a walk along the lake, observing the small ripples in the water, the birds that moved from tree to tree, the wind brushing across the surface. Each afternoon, I would wander the streets, exploring little shops, greeting familiar faces, and allowing myself to simply exist without expectation. Each evening, I would write, letting words become a bridge between my inner world and the reality around me. One morning, I received a brief message from my daughter. It was simple, a small acknowledgement that she was thinking of me. I felt a surge of warmth and longing, but I did not respond immediately. I waited, letting the moment exist without rushing it. When I finally replied, it was gentle, unpressured, affirming that I was well, and expressing my hope that she was too. The exchange, brief though it was, reminded me that connections do not always need to be constant to be meaningful. Sometimes, a few words, sent and received with care, can carry a lifetime of love. In the following days, I continued to observe life around me. I noticed how people supported one another quietly. The shopkeeper helping an elderly customer, the neighbor lending a hand with groceries, children sharing their small treasures with one another. These moments were simple, yet profound reminders that connection exists in myriad forms. It was a lesson I carried inward, understanding that even in absence, love and care could manifest in subtle ways, without demand, without expectation, without pressure. I also began to appreciate the strength of resilience, both in myself and others. Life, I realized, is rarely gentle. It asks us to endure, to adapt, to carry both joy and sorrow with equanimity. And yet, in those challenges, there is growth. There is learning. There is the quiet accumulation of strength that comes not from triumph alone, but from persistence through pain, from patience through uncertainty, from love expressed through restraint. I spent many afternoons at the lake, often alone, sometimes with strangers who wandered by. The water became a mirror for reflection, both literal and figurative. I thought about my life, my choices, my regrets, and my hopes. I thought about the years with my daughter, the sacrifices, the small joys, the missed opportunities, and the lessons learned. I began to understand that life is a tapestry woven from countless moments, some painful, some joyous, all significant. And in that understanding, I felt a quiet acceptance settle over me. Writing remained central to my evenings. I filled pages with memories, reflections, and hopes. I wrote about my daughter, about my own journey, about the town, about the quiet beauty of ordinary life. Writing became a ritual, a form of meditation, a way to process emotions that words spoken aloud could not capture. It also became a way to witness my own growth, to trace the arc of a journey that had begun with loss, grief, and separation, and was slowly moving toward understanding, acceptance, and quiet hope. I began to feel more grounded. The ache of separation did not vanish, but it became bearable, integrated into the fabric of my life rather than dominating it. I discovered that solitude, while challenging, also offered clarity. I saw the world more fully, with attention to detail and appreciation for subtleties I had previously overlooked. I listened more than I spoke. I observed more than I acted. I let life unfold in its own time, without interference, without expectation. Over time, I recognized a subtle shift in my heart. Where once there had been longing intertwined with frustration and guilt, now there was hope intertwined with patience and understanding. I realized that love is not static. It changes shape, adapts, and sometimes requires stepping back. Love, I understood, is not always measured by proximity or interaction, but by intention, respect, and endurance. It can survive absence, grow through patience, and endure through trust. I also began to see how my absence had created space for my daughter to grow. I imagined her navigating her own life, learning to balance love and independence, discovering her own voice, establishing her own boundaries. And I felt a quiet pride in her, coupled with the enduring ache of distance. I understood that by stepping away, I had not diminished my love for her. Rather, I had expressed it in the form of trust, respect, and patience. As months turned into nearly a year, I began to feel a sense of rhythm and belonging within the town itself. It was not the same as the belonging I had known with my family, nor was it meant to be. It was a quieter, gentler kind of belonging, a connection to routine, to observation, to self. I found comfort in knowing that life could be lived fully, even in solitude, and that the heart could hold both love and distance without being diminished. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, I sat by the lake, reflecting on the journey I had undertaken. I thought about the choice I had made to step away, the pain it had caused, the lessons it had taught. I realized that while the journey had been difficult, it had also been transformative. I had learned patience, acceptance, self-compassion, and the enduring power of love expressed through restraint. I understood, finally, that absence does not erase connection, that love, even when distanced, persists, that patience and respect can be acts of devotion, that healing is not linear, and growth often requires stepping into discomfort. And I understood that sometimes, the greatest gift we can give to those we love is the space to become themselves, even if it means walking alone for a while. And in that quiet understanding, I felt a peace I had not known in years. It was not loud or dramatic, but steady, deep, and unshakable. It was the peace that comes from knowing that love endures, that life continues, and that the choices we make, even the hardest ones, can carry meaning, compassion, and hope. Time had begun to move in a rhythm that no longer felt foreign to me. Each day flowed into the next, a sequence of quiet mornings, gentle afternoons, and reflective evenings. The town had settled into my life the way water fills the spaces in a vessel, molding itself gently around me. I had begun to understand that life does not always demand dramatic moments to teach its lessons. Sometimes, the greatest truths come in whispers, the soft footsteps of a child on the sidewalk, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the subtle changes in the sky as light shifts from dawn to dusk. One morning, as I walked along the lake, I noticed a mother with her small child feeding the ducks. The child's laughter rang out, light and unburdened, and for a moment, I felt a sharp pang of longing for the days when my daughter had been that age. I remembered the way she had once clutched my hand as if the world could only be safe with me guiding her, how she had trusted completely, without question or hesitation. Those memories were bittersweet. They carried warmth and joy, yet also the sorrow of knowing that time moves relentlessly forward, taking moments with it. I realized that my own journey had mirrored this flow. I had been swept along by life for so long, caught up in responsibilities and expectations, that I had rarely paused to notice the subtle beauty around me. The decision to step away from my daughter's life had been painful, yet it had granted me a rare gift, the ability to observe, to reflect, and to grow quietly. In solitude, I discovered resilience, patience, and a deeper understanding of love's complexity. Writing remained my sanctuary. Each night, I sat at my desk and let my thoughts spill onto the page. I wrote about my daughter, about the choices I had made, about the ache of absence and the small moments of grace that had filled the spaces left behind. The pages became a mirror, reflecting not just my memories, but also the evolving understanding of myself. I saw patterns in my fears, traces of hope in my longing, and the faint outlines of the person I was becoming. Writing had become a form of meditation, a gentle process of untangling emotions too intricate to speak aloud. One afternoon, I wandered into a small cafe I had not visited before. The aroma of roasted coffee beans mixed with the faint sweetness of pastries, and the soft murmur of conversation created a cocoon of warmth. I ordered a cup of tea and found a seat by the window, watching people pass by. A young couple walked hand in hand. A man carried a briefcase and a small child's backpack, and a group of teenagers laughed as they navigated the sidewalk. Each scene reminded me of the countless ways lives intersect, overlap, and diverge. I thought about my daughter and how her path had begun to diverge from mine in ways that were both necessary and painful. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I walked back to the motel, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The evening was quiet, the air carrying a faint chill. I sat by the window with my notebook and reflected on the months that had passed since I first arrived in the town. I recognized how much I had grown, how much I had learned about patience, self-compassion, and the subtle ways love manifests in absence. I also felt the deep, persistent ache of missing my daughter, an ache that had softened but not disappeared. It was during one of these quiet evenings that I realized the depth of my own transformation. I no longer felt desperate for connection, nor did I feel lost in solitude. Instead, I felt a steady sense of self-awareness and inner strength. I had learned to carry my longing without allowing it to consume me. I had discovered that love can be expressed in countless ways, and sometimes the most profound acts of love require restraint, patience, and trust. Over the following weeks, I continued my gentle routines. Mornings at the lake, afternoons exploring the town, evenings spent writing. I began to notice small signs of life that had previously escaped my attention. The way a bird paused mid-flight to hover for a moment, the delicate pattern of shadows on a wall, the faint ripple across the water as a fish surfaced. Each observation was a reminder that life, in all its complexity, carries beauty, even in ordinary moments. I also began to notice a subtle shift in how I perceived my daughter's absence. At first, it had felt like a void, a sharp emptiness that gnawed at my heart. Over time, that emptiness transformed into a quiet space of reflection. I no longer measured my days by her presence or absence, but by the small moments of awareness and connection I could cultivate in the world around me. I learned that absence does not equate to loss. It can be a canvas for growth, understanding, and enduring love. One evening, as I walked along the edge of the lake, I encountered a man fishing alone. We exchanged a polite nod, and he asked if the water had been fruitful that day. Our conversation was brief, yet it carried an unexpected warmth. We spoke of the weather, of the calmness of the lake, of the gentle rhythms of life in the town. It struck me that connection need not be profound to be meaningful. Even small, ordinary exchanges can remind us of our shared humanity. That night, as I returned to my room, I reflected on the nature of love and sacrifice. I thought about my decision to step away from my daughter's life and how it had challenged every instinct within me. It had required courage, humility, and trust. And though the pain of separation had been immense, I recognized that it had also allowed my daughter the space to grow, to navigate her life, and to understand the depths of our bond in her own time. Love, I realized, is not always immediate or visible. It is often quiet, patient, and enduring. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of life in the town became both familiar and comforting. I continued to write, to walk, and to observe, allowing myself to exist fully in the present without being consumed by the past. The ache for my daughter remained, but it had softened into a gentle yearning rather than a sharp wound. I began to understand that healing is not linear. It is a slow, often imperceptible process, unfolding quietly over time. I also began to notice the subtle ways in which my presence, though absent from my daughter's immediate life, still mattered. Small gestures, a note left in her mailbox, a brief phone call, a thoughtful message, reminded me that love endures, even when it is not always seen or acknowledged. And I began to recognize that patience, restraint, and trust can be powerful expressions of love, often more enduring than proximity or constant interaction. One afternoon, I visited the bookstore again, losing myself among the shelves and the familiar scent of paper and ink. I discovered a collection of letters written by a father to his daughter, letters filled with love, reflection, and guidance. I read them slowly, savoring each word, and felt a deep resonance. The letters reminded me that love can be expressed in countless ways, that distance does not diminish its power, and that patience and reflection can create bonds that endure even in absence. As the seasons changed, I noticed the subtle shifts in the town, the way the leaves turned from green to gold, the crispness of the air, the softer light of autumn afternoons. These changes mirrored the transformations within me. I recognized that life is a series of transitions, each with its own lessons and opportunities for growth. I learned to embrace these changes, to observe them without resistance, and to find peace in their inevitability. One evening, as I walked along the lake, I saw a father teaching his child to skip stones. The child laughed each time a stone bounced across the water, and the father's eyes sparkled with quiet pride. I watched them for a long time, feeling a complex mixture of longing, hope, and understanding. I thought about my own daughter and the moments we had shared, and I realized that love is not diminished by absence. It is strengthened by trust, patience, and the enduring commitment to care, even when it is expressed quietly. In my writing, I began to explore deeper reflections on life, love, and the passage of time. I wrote about the importance of patience, the necessity of resilience, and the quiet power of observation. I reflected on my own growth, the lessons learned through solitude, and the ways in which absence had shaped my understanding of love. I recognized that my journey had not been one of avoidance or escape, but of deliberate choice, guided by the desire to honor my daughter's autonomy and to cultivate my own inner strength. One morning, I received a message from my daughter that carried a warmth I had not felt in months. It was brief, yet it spoke volumes, a simple acknowledgement of love, a recognition of presence, and a subtle invitation for connection. I felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. I did not rush to respond, allowing the moment to exist fully, savoring the delicate balance between presence and patience. When I finally replied, my words were gentle, affirming, and filled with love. It was a moment of connection that, though small, carried profound significance. Over the following weeks, our exchanges became more frequent, though always measured and respectful. We shared memories, reflections, and small details of our daily lives. Each message, each conversation, was a reminder that love persists, even across distance and time. I began to understand that the bond between a parent and child is not defined solely by proximity, but by the enduring presence of care, respect, and understanding. I also began to recognize the ways in which my own growth had shaped my capacity for connection. The patience I had cultivated, the empathy I had nurtured, the self-awareness I had developed. All of these allowed me to engage with my daughter more fully and meaningfully, even in absence. I realized that stepping away had not weakened our bond, but had, in subtle ways, strengthened it, creating space for reflection, understanding, and enduring love. As winter approached, I found solace in the quiet beauty of the season, the stillness of snow-covered streets, the soft glow of streetlights against frosted windows, the crispness of the air that carried both chill and clarity. I walked daily, observing the subtle shifts in the environment, appreciating the way life continues to unfold even in apparent dormancy. These observations mirrored my internal journey, a reminder that growth often occurs quietly, beneath the surface, unnoticed until its effects are revealed. In the quiet evenings, I wrote more intentionally, exploring the lessons of patience, presence, and enduring love. I reflected on the ways in which stepping away had allowed both my daughter and myself to grow, to understand, and to heal. I wrote about the importance of observing life without judgment, of embracing solitude as an opportunity for reflection, and of cultivating inner strength through patience and self-compassion. One night, as I gazed at the stars above the lake, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the small moments of joy and connection, for the enduring bond with my daughter, and for the quiet strength that solitude had nurtured within me. I realized that love is not always measured by presence, but by the depth of care, the willingness to trust, and the capacity to endure. It is expressed in patience, in reflection, and in the quiet commitment to honor the autonomy and growth of those we cherish. And in that understanding, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in years. It was not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady, enduring, and profound. It was the peace that comes from knowing that love persists, that growth occurs in both presence and absence, and that the choices we make, even the hardest ones, can carry meaning, compassion, and hope. The first frost of winter settled gently over the town, frosting the rooftops and the edges of the lake with a delicate layer of ice. I walked slowly, breathing in the crisp air, letting it fill my lungs and awaken senses that had long been dulled by worry and fatigue. There was a clarity in the cold, a sharpness that made the ordinary seem extraordinary. The way the sunlight glinted off frozen branches, the way footprints left patterns in the snow, the way the world seemed to hold its breath in quiet anticipation. In those moments, I felt alive in a way I hadn't for many years. I found myself thinking often about my daughter, about the life she was building, the choices she had made, and the person she was becoming. I realized that my absence had given her space to grow, to stumble, to find her own voice, and to discover strength she might not have realized she had. It was a painful truth at first, but over time, it became one of the most profound lessons of my life. Love sometimes demands courage not only to give, but also to step back. One evening, I received a longer message from her than usual. She spoke about her experiences, the challenges she was facing, and small victories that made her proud. I read every word carefully, savoring the nuances, the honesty, the tenderness woven into her writing. I felt a swell of pride, tempered by the gentle ache of knowing that so much of her life had unfolded without me physically present. And yet, I also realized that my presence, though absent, had not disappeared. It had merely transformed, taking the shape of patient love, understanding, and respect. I responded slowly, thoughtfully, with words that conveyed care without pressure, pride without control, and love without expectation. There was a rhythm in these exchanges, a rhythm of connection that was steady, gentle, and deeply meaningful. I understood that relationships, especially those forged through years of shared history and complex emotions, do not always need constant proximity to thrive. Sometimes, they thrive through trust, patience, and subtle acts of presence. The days continued in a quiet pattern. Mornings by the lake, afternoons wandering through streets and shops, evenings writing and reflecting. I noticed that the more I embraced this rhythm, the more life began to feel rich, layered, and significant. Even the simplest events, a warm cup of tea, a conversation with a neighbor, a snowfall across the lake, became profound moments of awareness and gratitude. I began to understand that happiness does not always arrive in grand gestures. Often, it resides in the quiet, ordinary flow of life, waiting for us to notice it. One chilly morning, I saw a small girl struggling to balance on a thin sheet of ice near the lake's edge. Her father called out from a short distance, encouraging her, offering guidance but not intervention. I watched quietly, feeling a deep connection to that scene. It reminded me of my own daughter as a child, the careful balance between holding on and letting go, between guiding and allowing freedom. I felt a rush of tenderness, awareness, and a quiet acceptance of life's intricate lessons. That evening, I wrote extensively in my journal. I reflected on the ways in which stepping away from my daughter's life had allowed both of us to grow. I acknowledged the pain, the longing, and the guilt I had carried, but I also celebrated the strength, patience, and insight I had gained. I wrote about the subtle beauty of love expressed in restraint, the quiet power of observation, and the enduring significance of presence even when physically absent. My words became a testament to the journey, a map of emotional terrain navigated with care and honesty. Winter deepened, and with it came long nights filled with reflection. I would sit by the window, watching snowflakes drift slowly to the ground, each one unique, fragile, fleeting. In those hours, I thought about the nature of life, the inevitability of change, and the permanence of love that persists despite distance and time. I understood that relationships, like the snow, are delicate and transient, yet each interaction leaves a mark, a pattern, a trace that endures. And in this understanding, I felt a profound sense of calm. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from my daughter's husband. His words were respectful, warm, and unexpectedly candid. He expressed appreciation for the patience I had shown, for allowing space, and for the enduring support I had offered from afar. I paused, reading and rereading his message, feeling a mixture of surprise, relief, and quiet pride. It was a moment of reconciliation, a subtle acknowledgement that my choices had been seen and understood, even if not always directly spoken about. I realized then that reconciliation does not always arrive in dramatic declarations or sweeping gestures. Often, it comes quietly, through acknowledgement, understanding, and the soft unfolding of respect. And in that moment, I understood that love, patience, and humility can pave the way for healing, even after years of distance, misunderstanding, and heartache. I continued my routines, though now with a subtle sense of connection that had previously been absent. The exchanges with my daughter, the small acknowledgments from her husband, the quiet interactions in the town, all contributed to a growing sense of integration. I felt both grounded in solitude and connected to the world in meaningful ways. Life, I realized, is a delicate balance between presence and absence, engagement and observation, giving and letting go. One evening, as the lake reflected the soft glow of the moon, I walked slowly along its frozen edge. I thought about the year that had passed, the lessons learned, and the growth achieved. I remembered the choice I had made to step away, the pain it had caused, and the clarity it had ultimately brought. I recognized that love is not a static state, but an evolving practice, a practice of patience, humility, reflection, and enduring commitment. I began to see subtle changes in myself as well. My thoughts were calmer, less burdened by guilt and longing. My emotions were steady, grounded, and reflective rather than reactive. I had learned to hold both joy and sorrow without letting either dominate, to observe the world with care and attention, and to engage with others with empathy and understanding. These shifts, though gradual, felt profound. They were markers of growth, evidence of a heart that had learned to navigate complexity with grace. Occasionally, I would receive letters from my daughter, longer reflections that shared her inner world, her challenges, her victories, her small discoveries about life, love, and herself. I read each carefully, savoring the words, the pauses, the honesty. And I responded in kind, with messages that were patient, thoughtful, and full of quiet encouragement. Through these exchanges, I felt our connection deepen, not through constant interaction, but through thoughtful, intentional presence. Spring arrived slowly, carrying with it the first signs of renewal. Buds appeared on trees, birds returned to the lake, and the air warmed with gentle sunlight. I walked among the blossoms, noticing how life finds a way to renew itself even after the harshest winters. It struck me that human relationships operate in much the same way. Even after periods of absence, strain, or silence, connections can bloom again, nurtured by patience, care, and understanding. One afternoon, I visited the small bookstore once more, losing myself among the shelves and the comforting scent of paper. A young woman working there recommended a book about a father's reflections on life and love. I purchased it, eager to immerse myself in another narrative of patience, growth, and the quiet endurance of connection. Reading it, I felt both resonance and affirmation. My journey, though unique, was part of a larger tapestry of human experience, a testament to the enduring nature of love, reflection, and personal growth. That night, I sat by the window, the sky clear and filled with stars. I thought about the lessons I had learned, that love is patient, resilient, and enduring, that absence can be a form of presence, that growth often requires space and reflection, and that reconciliation is a quiet process, built on understanding, humility, and acknowledgement. I realized that my journey was far from over, yet I felt a profound sense of peace. I had navigated loss, longing, and separation, and emerged with a deeper understanding of myself, my daughter, and the enduring power of love expressed thoughtfully and deliberately. The following weeks brought continued moments of reflection and connection. I wrote more intentionally, exploring the intricate balance between love and distance, patience and engagement, presence and respect. I walked along the lake, observing the subtle changes in nature, finding metaphors for the human experience in the movement of water, the flight of birds, and the quiet unfolding of seasons. Each observation was a reminder that life, in all its complexity, carries beauty, even in the smallest, most ordinary moments. I also began to notice the subtle ways in which my own transformation had affected those around me. Strangers in the town greeted me with warmth, neighbors offered small acts of kindness, and even the brief exchanges with visitors at the lake carried a sense of connection and acknowledgement. I realized that personal growth, though internal, inevitably radiates outward, influencing the world in subtle, meaningful ways. One evening, I received a message from my daughter that brought tears to my eyes. She spoke about her gratitude, her understanding, and her love for me, acknowledging the patience and care I had shown through absence. Her words were tender, honest, and deeply moving. I read them slowly, savoring each sentence, feeling both pride and humility. It was a moment of emotional reunion, not marked by proximity, but by the depth of understanding, acknowledgement, and love. In that moment, I realized that the hardest choices often carry the most profound rewards. Stepping away had been excruciating, yet it had allowed both my daughter and myself to grow, to reflect, and to strengthen our bond in ways that proximity alone could not have achieved. Love, I understood fully, is not measured by constant presence, but by intention, patience, respect, and enduring commitment. The first warmth of spring had settled over the town, softening the sharp edges of winter and painting the world in tender hues of green and gold. I walked along the familiar paths by the lake, taking in the gentle transformation of nature. Every branch, every blade of grass, every ripple on the water seemed to whisper reminders of resilience, renewal, and the quiet beauty of life. The lake, once a mirror of my solitude and longing, now reflected a deeper understanding, a reflection of patience, endurance, and the enduring power of love. I had begun to notice how far I had come. The ache of absence was no longer a sharp pain, but a subtle undercurrent, a quiet presence in the background of my daily life. I had learned to carry it with grace, to let it remind me of love's depth without allowing it to dominate my thoughts. I had discovered that absence does not mean disconnection. It can become a space for reflection, growth, and understanding. And through that space, I had cultivated a new kind of intimacy with my daughter, one rooted not in constant interaction, but in trust, respect, and enduring care. One afternoon, I received a longer letter from her. It was filled with stories of her daily life, her hopes, her fears, and her reflections. She wrote of moments when she had thought of me, when she had drawn on lessons I had once shared, and when she had felt the quiet strength of my love despite my absence. I read every word slowly, allowing each sentence to settle in my mind and heart. There was a tenderness in her writing that reminded me of her childhood, her innocence, and her growing wisdom. And I felt a swell of emotion, pride, love, and quiet joy intertwined with the gentle ache of distance. I wrote back carefully, thoughtfully, with words chosen not to instruct or guide, but to affirm, support, and nurture. I wanted her to feel my presence without pressure, my care without expectation, my love without conditions. In those exchanges, I realized that reconciliation, connection, and intimacy do not always require physical proximity. They require attention, honesty, and a willingness to meet each other's hearts where they are. As the days passed, I began to notice subtle changes in myself. I was calmer, steadier, more attuned to the small, delicate rhythms of life. I listened more attentively, observed more deliberately, and engaged with care and empathy. The lessons I had learned through absence, patience, humility, self-reflection, and trust had woven themselves into the fabric of my being. I no longer rushed through moments or clung desperately to outcomes. I had learned to flow with life, to accept uncertainty, and to hold love gently in my hands. The town, too, had become a part of me. I knew its streets, its people, its quiet corners and bustling little shops. I had grown to appreciate the small gestures of kindness around me. The neighbor who offered a cup of tea, the clerk who remembered my order, the children whose laughter echoed through the park. These small acts, ordinary yet profound, reminded me that connection is everywhere if we are willing to notice it. Life, I realized, is composed not only of grand events, but of countless small, tender moments that collectively form meaning, joy, and love. One evening, I walked along the lake as the sun set, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The water mirrored the light, each ripple catching the glow in a way that seemed almost magical. I thought about the journey I had undertaken, the decision to step away, the months of solitude, the reflection and growth, and the slow reconnection with my daughter. I understood that every choice, no matter how painful, carries within it the potential for growth, understanding, and profound love. It was in these moments of reflection that I realized the truth I had been seeking all along. Love is not measured by constant presence or control. Love is measured by patience, respect, trust, and the willingness to let go when necessary. It is expressed in small, thoughtful gestures as much as in grand declarations. It thrives in absence as much as in proximity, and it endures, even when circumstances seem to push it into silence. Over the following weeks, my connection with my daughter deepened. Our letters and messages became more frequent, more reflective, and more heartfelt. We shared not only stories of our lives, but also the wisdom and understanding we had gained through time apart. I realized that stepping away had not weakened our bond. It had strengthened it, creating a foundation of trust, empathy, and mutual respect. Each exchange, each shared thought, was a testament to the enduring power of love expressed thoughtfully and deliberately. I also began to understand the power of forgiveness, not only forgiving others, but forgiving myself. I had carried guilt, regret, and frustration for many years, believing that I had fallen short in countless ways. Through reflection and solitude, I learned to release those burdens, to acknowledge my humanity, and to embrace the lessons embedded in my experiences. Forgiveness allowed me to engage more fully with my daughter, with life, and with myself. It created a space for love to flourish without the shadows of past mistakes. Spring deepened into early summer, bringing warmth, light, and renewal. The lake shimmered under the sun, trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the town hummed with quiet life. I continued my walks, my writing, and my reflection, but now there was an added richness, a sense of connection to the world, to my daughter, and to myself that I had not known before. Life felt expansive, layered, and deeply meaningful. I understood that the journey through pain, absence, and reflection had led to a clarity and depth of love that could not have been achieved otherwise. One afternoon, I received a message from my daughter that took my breath away. She spoke of her gratitude, her understanding, and her love for me, acknowledging the patience, care, and restraint I had shown over the months. Her words were tender, honest, and deeply moving. I read them over and over, allowing their meaning to settle into my heart. I felt a profound sense of connection, reconciliation, and completion, not a dramatic reunion, but a gentle affirmation of enduring love and mutual understanding. I realized then that the journey I had undertaken, the decision to step away, the months of solitude, the careful cultivation of patience and reflection, had borne fruit. Love, when expressed with intention and care, endures. Absence does not erase connection. Patience fosters trust. Reflection nurtures understanding. And even the most difficult choices, when made with love at their core, can create bonds that withstand time, distance, and challenge. In the quiet moments that followed, I walked along the lake, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The water reflected the sky, each ripple carrying a subtle shimmer of light. I thought about my daughter, about the lessons we had both learned, and about the enduring nature of love expressed through patience, respect, and understanding. I understood that life's greatest gifts are often subtle, quiet, and deeply transformative. They are found not in grand gestures or constant presence, but in the willingness to love thoughtfully, to give space, and to trust in the enduring connection of the heart. That evening, I wrote the final entry in my journal, a reflection on the journey of the past year. I wrote of love and absence, of growth and reflection, of patience and forgiveness. I wrote of the quiet moments of beauty, the subtle acts of kindness, and the profound lessons learned through solitude. I wrote of my daughter, my enduring love for her, and the gentle, resilient bond that had been strengthened through space and understanding. And I wrote of hope, the knowledge that life, though unpredictable, carries within it the possibility of connection, joy, and deep, abiding love. As I closed the journal, I felt a sense of completion and peace. The ache of absence had transformed into a quiet presence, a reminder of love's depth and resilience. The solitude had nurtured clarity, self-compassion, and understanding. And the gentle reconnection with my daughter had affirmed that patience, respect, and enduring care can create bonds that are unbreakable. I understood, finally, that the greatest acts of love are often quiet, unassuming, and patient. They are expressed not in demand or expectation, but in trust, humility, and understanding. They endure through absence, strengthen through reflection, and blossom in moments of heartfelt connection. And in that understanding, I felt a profound sense of peace, a peace that comes from knowing that love, true love, endures in all circumstances, carries through time, and touches the heart in ways both visible and unseen. Walking along the lake one last time that evening, I breathed in the crisp air, listened to the gentle rustle of leaves, and felt the soft warmth of the fading sun. I carried with me the lessons of patience, reflection, and enduring love. I carried the knowledge that absence does not diminish connection, that growth often requires space, and that the heart can hold love, longing, and understanding all at once. And in that quiet moment, I smiled, knowing that the journey, painful, reflective, and ultimately transformative, had led me to a deeper, truer understanding of what it means to love, to forgive, and to endure. I had learned that the most profound gifts are not always given in presence, but in patience, not in control, but in trust, not in proximity, but in the enduring strength of the heart. And with that, I walked forward, carrying love, hope, and quiet wisdom into the unfolding chapters of life, grateful for the journey, the lessons, and the unbreakable bond that distance, time, and choice could never diminish.